Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. If you are the parent of a teen or preteen girl, what do you tell them about developing their own sense of power, emotional power, spiritual power, social power, the power of self-confidence, the power of knowing themselves? Well, tonight, we take a look at all of those things and more as we talk to author Leah Johnson. She is the award-winning author of a new book titled Black Girl Power. It's an anthology of more than a dozen authors addressing the complexities of growing up as a Black girl. Leah, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So this is, as I said, it's an anthology, not just all of your creative thoughts. What prompted you to bring this collection of fantastic authors together, including your own kind of contribution?
Yeah, I think for me, one of my favorite parts of being a Black woman is being able to be in community with other Black women. We have an experience that nobody else will understand quite in the same way that we experience it. We speak a language nobody else understands really. And so I find that it's so much more powerful when we harness our collective experience, when we harness our collective compassion and intelligence and skills. And this anthology is a manifestation of all that. It was a real opportunity for me to do what I hadn't been able to do before, which is talk about Black girlhood, but widen the lens. I can only speak personally from one type of experience, even though fiction allows me to explore a lot of different avenues. But when I bring in writers from the diaspora, we got writers from who were born in other countries. We have writers who experience gender a little differently. We have writers who are, talking about different forms of religion and social constructs. And I can't do all that work in my book, but if I bring us together, then we can do that work together, and it's a lot more powerful that way, I think.
How would you define Black girl power?
So, a question a lot of people have asked me is like, why didn't you just call it Black Girl Magic? Like that's the go-to phrase is Black Girl Magic.
Mhm.
And for me, what I wanted to capture in this anthology was not some magical, mystical idea of being a Black woman. I think a lot of times Black girls and Black women have this ideal projected onto us that we are supposed to be able to carry anything. We're supposed to be able to withstand anything. And we're not allowed to break down. We're not allowed to have flaws. We're not allowed to make bad decisions. And for me, the power inherent to Black girlhood is that we are worthy of love and care, regardless of whether or not we are magical, whether or not we are strong all the time, whether or not we are, and I'm putting air quotes around this, articulate. I think the power of Black girlhood is something we're born with, and we carry it with us regardless of the choices we make, regardless of where we're from, regardless of who our parents are. And that's what I wanted us to focus on in this collection.
Mhm. When you talk about this particular book, who is the audience?
So, our target audience is middle schoolers. So, it's a anthology specifically for kids between the ages of 8 and 12. But this is an anthology specifically about Black girlhood. And so my hope is that young Black girls pick this book up and they see different versions of themselves reflected in the stories. But for folks who aren't coming at this, who are Black girls, I hope that they're able to see a window into an experience that's unlike their own. I think that's the real beauty of storytelling. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about this all the time, this idea of windows and mirrors. Stories reflect our experiences back to us, but sometimes more importantly, they give us windows into experiences unlike our own. And so you're not a Black girl, maybe, and you still want to pick up the book. Well, maybe this will give you insight into an experience you've never seen before, or make you feel a little more connected to a community that you have previously not felt connected to. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, in an anthology like this.
Mhm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been a minute or two or 12 since you've been in middle school. Yeah.
Just a couple minutes. I'm so young and spry at the ripe old age of 30, but um it's been a while since I was in middle school, and you could not pay me to go back. You could not pay me to go back to that time of my life. And it's so funny that I now like write books for middle schoolers because that means I go into middle schools often and talk to kids. And I'm like, yeah, this is still as horrible as it always has been. Like you guys are going through it here. And I get it.
Yeah, and see that was my question, because how does a 30-year-old write relevant issues? How do you continue to explain this quickly changing culture when it's been so long? And so tell me about going into the middle school and talking to Black girls, and I would imagine others as well. First of all, how do you get access to them? And because I would imagine administrators are like, you want to do what? Now, you do obviously have a well-heeled reputation as an author, and so even those who don't know who you are can Google you and they say, okay, this is a safe place, safe person. I get it. But kids, they're like, what do you want? You want to talk to me about what? How does that work?
The kids are, in some ways, they're the hardest audience, but they're also the easiest audience because you always know where you stand with them. They're not going to pretend like they're with you when they're not with you. And so I like that. I like that. Just let me know where we're at so I can I can switch it up if I need to connect with you in a different way, or if maybe what I'm saying isn't landing because I'm using language that doesn't resonate, or I'm using references that don't work. The kids are going to let you know. I went to a school this morning and they let me know. Oh, they let
What
me know. They
happened?
said, "Listen," they
Tell
said,
the tale.
we're not rocking with it." I think actually not even the school this morning. That was fine. But I realized in that presentation, I was like, okay, so I'm referencing some books that maybe you all are not rocking with. I'm referencing artists that you all don't love. Let me switch it up. If I say Jason Reynolds, if I say Angie Thomas, if I say Tiffany D. Jackson, like these are authors that like they're hitting you because you guys have read their books before. But I'm not going to go in here talking about Shakespeare. I'm not going to go in here talking about David Foster Wallace. It's not relevant. And so I think that has been one of the greatest lessons in like code switching, not cultural code switching necessarily, because I'm a Black woman talking to Black kids, but you know, time code switching. Like I'm thinking of references and authors that maybe were popular with my generation, were popular when I was 18 or 19, or for this book 12 and 13. And so the kids they'll keep you on your toes in that way, and they keep you honest. And that's the way I'm able to keep doing this work, even though I'm getting older, is one, I think the themes in the book and all the books that I write are universal, right? The feeling of being an outsider, a feeling like everybody else has sort of gotten it figured out, but you never really got the memo on how to be cool. Um, Feeling like your brain works differently than the people around you because you're neurodivergent, or feeling like you're an outsider because you're queer and nobody else around you is all of those experiences transcend age, they transcend era, they remain true regardless of how old you are. And middle schoolers today feel the same way that I felt then. They just have different points of reference than I did. And that's one of the best parts about being in the schools, is that I get to see in real time what is and is not going to work in the stories that I'm writing. So I'm on TikTok, but their
Mhm.
version of TikTok is very different than the version of TikTok that I'm on. And so they're making references that they're like, oh, skibbity. I don't know what that means. Walk me through it. And so, and so it's really it's a lot of fun, being kept honest by the kids, and also it's like, this is my moment to, like, research. I get to, like, listen in on their conversations and see what they care about so that I can bring it back to the bring it back to the book on my next draft. So, um, yeah, school visits are really, really compelling, but I think it's worth mentioning that, like, I'm fortunate that I still get to do school visits because, um, my publisher is very supportive, or because I have a great publicist, or because librarians know my name and have read my books before. But there are a lot of authors. I mean, we saw in 2022 and 2023 especially, we saw more books being banned in this country than ever before. And
Yeah.
so along with those books being banned, about 49% of those books had to do with stories about race, stories about gender and sexuality, which means that writers of color and queer writers are less likely to be invited into schools and into classrooms. As their books get banned, so do the authors. And so while I have been very fortunate that my career is able to persist, um, that's not the case for a lot of people like me. And so it's a real challenge, I think, for a lot of writers to get access to students and for the students to get access to the writers.
You have an event this evening. Talk to me about where it is, when it is, and what you are hoping to come out of just the event.
Yeah, so tonight at 7 p.m., I will be at East City Bookshop with New York Times bestselling superstar authors Danielle Clayton and Roseanne A. Brown, who are both contributors in this anthology. And we will be talking about Black Girl Power. We'll probably be talking about the election because it's on all of our minds right now.
An
But
election? What election is that? Whatever are you talking about?
I know very small news, especially here in DC. Nobody's thinking about it. But to that end, we'll also be celebrating Black Girl Power because I think a lot of us need a moment of joy and celebration right now. So that's what we'll be doing tonight at East City Bookshop.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to talk to you about the impact that you believe, for example, this election year has had on the work that you do. I have so many questions just to ask you, not just about this book, but your work, um, your life, and where you think these things are going, because it's always wonderful to have, can I say young voices? Yeah, 30 young voice.
I feel young. I
A
feel
young, a young
youthful.
voice for young people. A young voice for young people.
I'll
Leah
take it.
Johnson, sit tight. We are going to take a break, but please don't forget you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insights segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next. That's on WHUR-FM. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our discussion about Black Girl Power. My guest is Leah Johnson, the award-winning children's book author. Black Girl Power is the title of her new book, debuting today. It is an anthology of fantastic authors talking about Black Girl Power. Leah, I want to ask you, when you have these conversations, first of all, with Black girls, outside of the lingo, but what are you learning about them that perhaps you didn't know after publishing your last book or the book before?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, like I said, the themes that are present in the book are the themes that are present in every classroom I go into. There is the same feeling of isolation and alienation and confusion, but also, of childlike joy of people who don't have to pay any bills. Today, I said,
Like that.
I said that somebody asked me how much money I got paid for my first book because kids love to talk about money,
I know,
and
don't they?
which is so interesting because I didn't have any money at 11, so maybe that's why it's so compelling in middle school. But one of them asked how much money I got paid for my first book, and I was like, "Oh, it wasn't that much. It was this amount." And one of them was like, "That's a lot of money," and I said, "You know what? Thank you," because because it's not a lot of money to me because
Right.
I had to live off of that check for 2 years, but to you all, that is helpful context that like when I'm talking to kids, because their life experience is so different, because so much of being a young person is thinking that you have all the answers and then being made to confront the reality over and over again that, oh my gosh, I actually don't have that answer. I don't know that. Um, that I was like, oh, I have to remember all the time that when I'm coming into these spaces, I'm entering a room of people who are like so they have so much, they're so bright-eyed still, and I'm jaded at the ripe old age of 30 in some ways, and so when I say something, it is sometimes met with, "What? That's so cool," or "That's so different," and I'm like, "Oh, thank you. You guys do think it's cool that I own a house," because I it's I when I was 12, I guess that would have been a cool thing to do too.
So y- a lot of your work is focused on girls. Do you talk to boys?
Yes, yes, all the time, all the time. Every school I've gone to, I think minus maybe 2 in my career have always been audiences full of boys and girls, kids of all races generally. For Black Girl Power, I specifically requested that when I go into a school, the kids in the school look more like me.
Hmm.
And so I've been able to talk to audiences of primarily Black kids, which has been wonderful, but, yeah, the audiences where I get to talk to boys and girls and, gender expansive kids all together are sometimes the most fruitful conversations we get to have because the same way I have no idea what it's like to be a kid now because social media didn't exist in the way it does now when I was a kid. Um, you know, uh, my relationship to the internet and television and music was very different because those things are constantly evolving. I also don't know what it's like to have been socialized as a Black boy. And
Hmm.
so they get to bring something really fresh and exciting to these conversations and ask questions that maybe I wouldn't have been thinking about.
So, and this is why I ask, because, as I'm sure you know, that in the current social climate regarding men, and certainly not to paint them with a dark broad brush, but I am a man, okay, and while I do consider myself to be thoughtful and progressive and open-minded in my thinking, I do know a few men who are not,
Right.
and so one or two or 12, but uh but the reason I ask is because I think for the Leah Johnsons of the world, that it is really important for Black boys at that critical age group, middle school, to have an opportunity to hear a voice like yours, even if the voice like yours is only asking them questions.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times, and this is perhaps anecdotally speaking, but I think a lot of times some of our young Black boys, other than perhaps their mothers in the best of situations, or grandmothers or aunties or whatever, but sometimes they don't always get the best examples of well-meaning Black womanhood. Do you understand what I mean?
Maybe, maybe. I think, you know, something that happens with Black folks in general, not just kids, but of all ages, is that we are often blank slates for the rest of the world to project their fears and anxieties onto. And
Or
so
positivity.
sure, sure. I mean, to the point about, the title of the anthology, I people have also for centuries projected the idea of a strong Black woman onto Black women, which doesn't have to be inherently harmful, but it often is because it
Mhm.
comes with it this completely inhuman expectation of always being able to bear everybody else's burdens. And so I think for centuries now, we have had to carry a lot of the world's ideas about who we are and have rarely been given the opportunity to have platforms where we can articulate our own experiences. And that's one of the reasons why I think writing these books is so important because it offers us like varied perspectives, but it is another way of opening up these conversations with people who very rarely get to have conversations about their experiences in an open forum. And I think that's crucial. I think it's crucial for all of us. Um, Black boys are so interesting to me because the world is so afraid of young Black men, um, and who they will grow up to be. They have all these ideas about how scary they are and this and that. And we know that that's not true. We know that these kids are filled with heart and humor and creativity and playfulness. And having people come into a space, whether that's a library or it's the classroom or, it's your after school program, having people enter into a space and look at those kids and see all those things in them is so critical. I don't want to enter into a room and assume the worst in the kids that are there. I want to enter into a room and assume, hey, every kid in here, I'm just going to believe. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and believe that everybody in here wants beautiful things. Everybody in here is going to engage in good faith. Everybody in here is here because y'all love learning and you love um, to hear different perspectives. And maybe that's not true, but I think that my pedagogy as an educator is rooted in the belief that kids are inherently good. And so
Mhm.
we owe them that respect. We owe them that trust when we enter into those spaces. And I often find that when you come into it like that, the kids will meet you there. If I have already expected you to be great, I've already expected you to be kind and generous and gentle, then you'll rise to the occasion more often than not. And so when you expect those things, I think that just shows, I think it shows kids, especially when I get to spend time with Black boys, it shows them like, oh my gosh, this is somebody who isn't coming into this with a preconceived notion of all the ways that I am already a villain in somebody else's story.
Yeah, and I think, and that's what I mean, because obviously, as you know, as a children's book author, there's a responsibility that you have that perhaps adult authors don't have,
Yeah.
especially because your stuff is good and it can be, and I'm not talking about told that your stuff is good by your peers, the awards and all of that. Yeah, those are great to have, obviously. But as you said, the flat-footed, plain-spoken, um, barefaced critics are middle schoolers,
Hmm.
and they don't know about awards. They don't care about awards.
They don't
They,
care at all. None of that
yeah,
matters. And I think I think that's so good. I mean, I don't know how any writer could go into schools and talk to middle schoolers and come out uh feeling haughty. Every single time, oh, they're humbling me. And you know what? That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Y'all have to remind me all the things that I don't know. You have to remind me of the ways that like maybe in certain spaces the awards do matter and I think they do have material consequences, but I don't do it for the awards. And this is a reminder of why, because the people that I'm trying to reach the awards don't make any difference to them.
They don't care.
The ability to connect is what matters to them. The ability to, like, be there with them on their level, speaking the same language is the thing that matters to them.
Why why middle school? Why not high school? What was there a watershed moment for you in middle school that made you want to tackle this issue?
I can't stress enough, Harold. I hated middle school. I hated it. I had a horrible, horrible time. And that is a real driving force for me in all of my work is identifying those pain points of why it was so difficult to navigate middle school and finding stories where I can put those ideas in there. I can imbue the stories with that discomfort, with that dissonance, and also on the other side of it, meet that discomfort with some measure of healing and meet it with adults that are compassionate and put people in the stories who can act as a sort of guide to the characters in ways that I didn't always have in middle school. The thing about writing for young people that's so important to me is you're not just teaching them how to read books. Every book teaches them, of course, like how to, be more analytical and how to read stories for plot and structure and themes. But when you write for children, you're also teaching them how to be a person. And so if I think of all my books as a form of instruction, then I have to be very, very intentional about not only who my audience is, but what it is I'm trying to get them to walk away with. And so for Black Girl Power, we're trying to get young readers to walk away with this sense of selfhood, of pride, of understanding that it's okay to be imperfect, but that imperfection doesn't mean you're not still worthy of love. And those are lessons that I want to hit you with right before you reach that point where you think you're too cool. I think um, YA is all about asking questions. So I write,
Young adult,
yeah,
for those who may
yeah,
not
I
be
also
familiar.
write young adult.
Yeah.
And I think that is a genre that's all about asking questions because you have teenagers who are, 16, 17, 18, who are beginning to ask these really huge questions about what it means to be alive and what kind of person they want to be in the world. And I think a lot of middle grade is answering questions because there's so much that's changing so quickly. There's a lot that it's just impossible to glean in a classroom. And so I think that a lot of those answers can be found in the pages of books, and that's where I found them.
You said you did not like middle school, hated middle school. Did things change in high school?
Yes. Yeah, I had a great time in high school. I have a one of my dear friends always says it was like we were in Degrassi when we were in high school. Degrassi is this like a teen show out of Canada. It was like a teen drama out of Canada set in this high school called Degrassi. Um, and I felt that way when I was in high school. I was like, this is great. I'm like, we all have our little communities and we have our extracurriculars. And I really found my niche in high school. I found the things that I was really good at and just made a home there. And when I was able to do that, I started to find my people. And that's really what gets you through these
Mhm.
difficult moments, I think, especially in adolescence, is who are your people and what are those people reinforcing for you?
Before the break, you were talking about the election, and no matter what the outcome was, it has been historic. But as it relates to your audience, Black girls, um, Black young adults, I'm sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this election season has given you more fuel for the fire.
Mm, yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, you know, it cannot be understated the impact of watching a Black woman launch such an incredible historic campaign for the presidency. Kamala Harris was, of course, not the first Black woman to run for president, but it was absolutely transcendent in its reach and impact. And so, in that way, I know that we have so many little girls across this country, Black girls in particular, who watched this campaign and said, look what's possible. Look how close she is. Look how realistic this is. I think too, for a lot of careers, and this is what the glass ceiling does, it shows us that you can get far, but only so far. And so to watch this woman not only be the vice president, but then launch such a huge campaign for the presidency, I think is an image that those results um, did not land the way that I and so many of us had hoped. I think the impact of that image cannot be understated.
To that point, it, the historic, certainly, but and I'll speak, specifically about a conversation that I had with one of my really good sister friends after last Tuesday, where she has a 15-year-old niece right at the beginning of high school, and who she was trying to explain to her all of the what was happening with her as she watched Too Young to Vote, seeing a, an intelligent Black woman who, as you said, reached the second highest position in this country, and seeing on one hand what was possible, but she had to also explain to her the difficult realities of being a Black woman in America, or being a Black girl in America. What is the conversation that you would have for the Black girls who read your books, who trust you, even if they don't necessarily know your name, but they know your characters?
Yeah, it's so difficult because before I left to go on tour, I'm currently on tour, going into
Right.
schools, doing events to promote Black girl power. And before I left, I was struck with this really defeated feeling of like, well, how am I supposed to look these girls in the face, these young Black kids in the face, every city I go to, and tell them, hey, everything's gonna be okay. You're doing great. Look at what's possible out here. Because the harsh reality is there are large swaths of this country that hate us. There are large swaths of this population who would rather uh, uh, a fascist be president than a highly qualified Black woman. And that's just the facts. That's just what it says on paper. But it is not helpful for me, I think, in my position to enter into spaces and tell these kids how hated they are, to tell them how much people would be willing to give up to ensure that Black women don't get ahead. What is helpful, though, is for me to not give in to despair, because despair is a tool of the oppressor. They want us to believe that we can't do it. They want us to believe that our voices don't matter. They want us to believe that our harnessed collective power doesn't have an impact. I can't give into that despair, and I can't allow these kids to give into it. I have to remind them, if nowhere else do you feel seen, you're going to feel seen when you read my books. If nowhere else do you feel loved and cared for and held, you will feel that in the pages of my books, because sometimes that is the only place where we feel like we have that level of care and compassion. And that's the reason why I started writing my first novel. My first book was about a queer Black girl from middle of nowhere, Indiana. And I started
Mhm.
writing it because I wanted to believe that it was possible, if nowhere else than in fiction, for somebody like me who moves through the world the way that I move through the world, who loves the way that I love, to have a life that is free of shame and fear. And I wrote that into existence because I wanted to believe it. And ultimately, I was able to step into that in my real life. I was able to embrace the belief that all those things were possible for me. I was able to walk into those experiences. And that's what I think fiction gives us. It's possibility making. It gives us a blueprint for possible futures. And if I'm providing the blueprint, then I want it to be to a life and a path that is as honest as it is hopeful.
And to that, because you mentioned this earlier about, and I don't want to poke the bear, but I'm not superstitious in this particular regard. But you mentioned that some authors have been canceled, their books have been banned, and to be able to write about that, and that particularly in the Black community, there is a great deal of toxic homophobia. Is that redundant? Maybe, but or maybe there's homophobia, then there's toxic homophobia.
Right. I was like, maybe that's the next level. I don't
But
know.
that's
All
the
of it's
next,
bad.
yeah. So, you know, so how do you, first of all, how do you address any pushback that you may have received, and how were you able to navigate that into a space where parents are often having a difficult time dealing with, as you mentioned, the gender expansive issues, Black parents?
Sure. I think to speak to the subject of book banning briefly, because I spend so much of my time talking about banned books because I own a bookstore, and our entire premise is that we sell books for, by, and about marginalized people, but particularly banned and challenged books. And so I think it's worth noting that banned books, the majority of books that are banned or challenged in this country, is banned and challenged by 12 people. There is a group of folks called Moms for Liberty. They're incredibly well
Yes, I'm
organized,
familiar.
who
Yes.
have um, who have done a lot of really, really nasty work in the book banning business. Um, and so the people who are working so hard to have these books removed from shelves are often not Black parents who are like going to school board meetings and saying, I don't want my kids to read about queer content. Um, these are parents who are highly conservative, and they're often in white communities. And so I think while homophobia is deeply entrenched in the Black community, the people who are most afraid of me are white people. Um, but that said,
Yeah, because
I
you look, I
think
mean, you look so
I'm
scary.
terrifying.
Ooh,
I'm
yeah.
terrifying. Look at
Mhm.
me with my
With,
with my
with your
little
with your
turtleneck
denim
on.
jacket and
Right.
and a nose piercing and
Right.
and perfect brown skin
Right.
and
Oh, she's so vicious.
you, ooh, let me stop the interview now. Ooh, no, please go right
Right.
ahead.
Um, yeah, I think just the image of me is really terrifying, and that's somebody who like has not engaged with my humanity in any real way. And so um that's one. I have not run up into a lot of challenges from Black parents, but that's not to say that homophobia is not a deeply entrenched problem in our community, which it absolutely is. And so um I think my work has been has often been uh, has often been marginalized even within the margins that I already exist in, because
Mhm.
I think that people don't think of queerness as something that is um, intersectional with Blackness. They think that, oh, that is a white person issue. That is something that like Black families don't have to deal with. Ah, being trans or non-binary, that's for white kids, and it's not. Again, if I can't do anything else in my books, I hope that my books are possibility making, and some of those possibilities are just for kids to recognize that, like, even if nobody around you believes in this part of you, if nobody around you can see this part of you for what it is, then it exists here. I'm Black, I'm queer, and I have built an entire life out of telling you stories, but also I get to live in the world as a Black queer person with my Black queer partner. And that is a really incredible, beautiful thing. And sometimes it takes stories to get us there. I didn't come out to my mom until after I had written my first book, because I just didn't think that my queerness had any place in our family. But
Mm.
that book gave me the language to talk about it. It opened up the line of communication between me and my mom to engage with it. And now my mom is a state representative in Indiana, where I'm from. And now my mom gets on the state house floor and makes impassioned speeches for queer rights to eliminate book bans in our state. And all that started with a conversation that was made possible by books. So I hope that parents enter into these stories with an open mind. I hope they recognize that for a lot of people, Black issues and queer issues all exist in the same we don't talk about it bubble. And so if you think that you are exempt from those conversations because you are Black but you're straight, I'm here to remind you that for a lot of folks, Blackness is just as dangerous and scary as queerness is. So we are in this fight together. All of our liberation is bound up in each other.
I got about a minute or so left. You've covered a lot of topics in your books, and obviously this latest project goes in, I believe a previous book you were part of the anthology. Now you've edited this. So what's the next thing? What's the next thing that you're going to perhaps tackle that you've not touched on yet?
Yeah, writing is such a deeply solitary activity. So much of it is done just like me by myself in a room with my laptop. And so working on more projects where I get to collaborate with other artists, I get to collaborate with other writers and get their perspectives and experiences is so important to me in this next era of my career. And so next year I have a book coming out with my friend George M. Johnson, who wrote the beautiful book All Boys Aren't Blue, which is the second most banned book in the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a book about two queer Black kids falling in love on the first day of the new year. And it has been so fun to work on that together, and such an education. George brings something to the table that I haven't ever been able to do in my own work. So I'm really, really excited about that. And I'm excited to just keep doing this.
Leah Johnson, it has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Congratulations on Black Girl Power. Looking for more good stuff down the road. Again, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, November 12th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.